Hey everyone, and welcome to CDK Live. Unfortunately, my stream to LinkedIn is having some issues right now, so I'm trying to resolve that. But I think I'm just going to remove it, and let's see if I can get it back. YouTube and see how things go here. All right, let's see. Let's see if it works. Okay, live. So first of all, if you're in the chat and you feel like saying hello, I always welcome that. But what we have going on today and over the course of the next 4 weeks is we will be going through the CDK workshop. So there's a lot of folks that are new to the CDK, maybe new to infrastructure as code, or you've been using infrastructure as code, but you've been using maybe a different infrastructure as code tool or language, and you're interested in the CDK, but the on-ramp feels a little daunting and you don't know where to get started. So over the course of the next 4 weeks, what we're going to do is we'll have four episodes. And the first episode today is going to be pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We're going to walk through the prerequisites that you need to install to get the CDK CLI up and running. We'll talk through bootstrapping your account, preparing everything you need to start writing CDK code and deploying it to your accounts. And then week 2, we'll actually dive in a little deeper. We'll start writing some CDK code. We will actually build, we'll deploy a CDK application. We'll look at building constructs, and then looking at using external constructs from external libraries. And then all the way through to the last week where we'll dive into a little bit more advanced CDK utilization. Specifically, we'll talk about CDK pipelines and how to wrap all of this into a pipeline and get everything deployed for you. So on that note, why don't we get started? So for those that are following along, 2 things I want to mention. One, the workshop is cdkworkshop.com. So it's publicly accessible. You don't need me here to do this. You can absolutely do this on your own. But I highly recommend, if you're new to the CDK and you want to just kind of walk through the process or watch someone do it, stick around. We'll walk through it. And you can also do it along with me as I go through the steps. The second thing to mention here is we're going to use TypeScript in this workshop, but you may notice that there are multiple language options here. So the beauty of the CDK is you are not limited to just one programming language when you're defining your infrastructure as code. The CDK supports Python, .NET, Java, Go, as well as C#. So one thing I will add is, given that TypeScript is the main language that CDK is written in, so there are times when you may see constructs available out in the community, things that folks build where they may not compile or transpile to all the other languages. They may just use TypeScript or Python. So just something to keep in mind, though. TypeScript is kind of that foundational language that the CDK was built on, and so on. But the cool thing is, if you build your own constructs and you want to convert those constructs to other languages, you can absolutely do that with the CDK and the JSII library. So again, cdkworkshop.com. Here is the link, and why don't we just we'll get right into it. So in this workshop, again, as I mentioned, we're doing a 4-part series here, and we'll walk through creating a CDK application. We're going to take a demo use case and deploy infrastructure as code using the CDK. We'll also couple our business logic, so our application code, into our CDK application for our Lambda function to run. We'll deploy a REST API, and then we'll also create custom constructs. So the really cool thing about the CDK, we tend to say that a lot, but there's a lot of really cool things about the CDK. But aside from being able to define your infrastructure as code using a programming language, the CDK has a powerful abstraction library. And This abstraction library we refer to these abstractions as constructs, and specifically L2 constructs and above. So we do have a video on cdklive.com where we dive into the various levels of constructs. So please check that out if you're interested in learning more about constructs and the levels of abstraction between the three. But quick little cheat session here is level 1 constructs map directly to CloudFormation resources. So think when you're writing CDK code, you're authoring in your programming language, but everything you're writing maps to a CloudFormation resource and CloudFormation properties. L2 constructs have more abstractions built in, and some of the more popular abstractions you see built into L2 constructs are like grant methods. So one of the biggest challenges of working in these, in complex environments is connecting all of your resources together via identity and access management. So grant methods are an example of an abstraction that allows you to very easily connect resources together through IAM with just a simple grant read, grant write method that you add to your object. And it will, behind the scenes, manage the IAM policies and make sure that those resources can speak to one another from an authorization perspective. And with all of that, you can also build your own custom constructs. So it's very common that you're working in an organization where you want to build reusability. We're writing code here, and you don't want to write the same code over and over again. And when you can modularize your code and create these modules that you can reuse across different teams, different functions, or simply reuse within your own code base, that's just a good practice. So the CDK supports that with these constructs, so you can package up your common patterns and abstract those in constructs and then reuse those in your code. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. Now, again, a couple other things. Documentation is really important. So as you're starting to learn the CDK, I definitely recommend looking at the API reference. And I'll show you that as I kind of walk through my code and my IDE. But also use an IDE, whether that's Visual Studio Code, Cloud9, PyCharm, whatever the IDE is of your choice. It just makes the experience a lot richer. And also for our Japanese friends, this workshop is in Japanese as well. Okay, so these are the prerequisites to get started with the CDK. You'll obviously need an AWS account. You're going to need a user that has access to that account to create these roles and policies. So we'll walk through the Bootstrap process, but essentially you're going to need to be able to create roles with that user and have elevated access. And then because, again, CDK is TypeScript based, you'll need Node.js installed, and then, of course, the CDK toolkit. Now, you'll see these other languages here. In this series, again, we're only going through TypeScript, but we will have another workshop series where we walk through Python, and we can go through those steps. So you don't need Python here necessarily, but for this workshop, what we're going to go through for the next 4 weeks, you'll want to get everything above the CDK toolkit here running. Now, I already have these installed, so I'm going to skip these steps, but what I will walk through, and here's some IDE recommendations. Again, Node.js, make sure you install Node, make sure you have a version greater than 10.13. Node's much, we're way past that. And installing the AWS CDK toolkit. So what we're going to do right now is install the CDK. And actually, let's zoom in here because this is hard to see. Perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is just run npm I, and I'm going to global install it, the AWS CDK. So I'm going with the latest version, and now what we can do is just type CDK -- version and see we are now on the latest version of the CDK. So CDK has weekly releases. Keep an eye on the GitHub repo to see all the changes that are going through. But yeah, obviously it is recommended, when you're working with the CDK, when you're working with any sort of, when you're working with, TypeScript projects, Node, Python, any language for that matter, you want to pin to specific versions. And then when you want to upgrade that version, obviously you want to test that in a lower environment as you update versions just to make sure things work as you expect, and so on. So we're good there. So now we're just going to jump right into the TypeScript workshop. So again, I just want to reiterate, if anyone has any questions or you want to say hello, jump into the chat. But we're just going to dive right into it right now. One thing to keep in mind, if you're testing this, if you're doing this on your own in your own personal account, there are costs associated with the resources we deploy. We'll deploy an S3 bucket, there'll be a Lambda function. Just know that, there are costs there. So when you're done with the project, when you're done walking through the workshop, please destroy your resources. I don't want to see you have to pay for things you're not using. So, okay. So the first step is we now have our CDK CLI installed, and we are now ready to initialize our CDK project. So to do this, we are going to use the CDK init command. And what this CDK init command is going to do is it's going to initialize a kind of like a skeleton framework of a project for us to get started and get working right away. So let's actually run through that, and we'll see what's within the project and all the various things that we can work with. But also, first step, make sure you create this CDK workshop folder, because that's where we're going to work today. And again, hopefully we're zoomed in good and everything looks good there. Okay, so I cheated. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do this workshop, and then we'll make dir CDK workshop. Okay, so we have an empty directory. So now we're going to run CDK init, and we're going to pass in our language, which in this case, the language could be Python, Go, whichever language you choose. But in this case, we're going to actually just use TypeScript. So what you can see is happening right now is it is creating that project structure, initializing all of the node dependencies that we need, and it's going to give us that blank project for us to jump in and get started. I'm going to add here, to not add too much confusion, and I'm not going to go into it today. We'll have another session on initializing your projects with ProdGen, but there is another open source project called ProdGen. That's PROGEN. And this is another really great tool that initializes CDK projects based on best practices. It automates and generates a lot of the templates and integrations that you would normally use when working with the CDK. So creating GitHub actions for pull request workflows, Mergeify configurations, and so on. And what's nice is it's all programmatically controlled through ProdGen, so you don't actually modify these configuration files on your own. You use the ProdGen configuration TypeScript file, and that will actually, every time you run it, ProdGen will configure everything for you. So it's a nice project generator, and it works really well with the CDK. So for this case, though, we're going to use the CDK CLI as we did, and we're going to work through what it gave us. Okay, so now what we'll want to do is just look through the project structure. So what I'll do is, let's see, actually, I'll open I don't have the file explorer, do I? Oh, there you go. Okay, that's a little better. So what we have here, do I have the file explorer? I can't even see. No. So actually, I'm just going to look through it here, and we'll run an ls. So you can see here's everything that the CDK CLI created for us when I ran that CDK init. Now, it gives us, a git ignore file, npm ignore, and then there's a README in there. So if we look at the README, by the way, in Visual Studio Code, let me remove this. In Visual Studio Code, I alias the code command to Vim because I'm just weird and Vim is all I know. So here's our README file. It just gives you, you know, a walkthrough on the commands you may want to use while building, running, testing your CDK code. But you can see here, that's what's in your README when you start. So in addition, we have the cdk.json file. Oops. So look at that cdk.json file as your, this is where we include feature flags, any sort of context that the CDK team may, the CDK CLI may look at when deploying. If there's like a new feature that's coming out in a later release, we may have a feature flag there that disables something until you're ready to enable it, because it could be a breaking change, things like that. So this is your CDK context is all stored in here. And one common thing that, you know, I've seen out in the world with folks using the CDK is they may couple their configuration or their like application specific or environment specific variables in the CDK JSON file. I wouldn't recommend doing this. First of all, it's just JSON, it's not dynamic. So you can't make any like programmatic decisions, you know, within this file. It's best to just leave this as a the place where CDK specific feature flags and context is managed and owned. So, and what I mean by that, by the way, is, you know, maybe it could be like context, you know, VPC ID is, you know, this 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's more ideal to create like helper utility functions or classes, and then import those into your CDK code, because you can then be a little more programmatic in your decision making. So instead of just having to hard code VPC ID, I may want to have some more logic that, based on environment, do this versus that. Okay, so that's our context file. And then it also generated a package JSON. So the package.json is just going to be all the packages required for our, you know, all the dependencies needed for CDK to run. What's nice about the CDK library, it's a mono library. So everything you need for the CDK library that's, of course, supported within the CDK library is available here. So our L2 constructs, some L3s, and so on. There may be times when you work with external projects. Those external projects you're going to want to, you'll just add to your dependencies here. So this is what we have here. This is the dev dependencies in order to run the CDK CLI, and which we need TypeScript and so on. Okay, so let's keep looking here. And then there's some configurations for testing. So a very good practice is to test your code. And we start out with just, again, a skeleton here that walks through a basic test that you can create. And you can run these tests to make sure that, you know, when you are defining your CDK code, when you go to deploy it, prior to you run your tests, and you make sure that the state that you expect of that resource is actually being matched when it's deployed. So think of it like unit tests. This is where you would want to define that. That's another session we will host as well down the road. So after this you know, workshop series, we'll go into tests in another session. Okay. So the two other things I want to point out, there's the TS config, that's going to be our TypeScript configuration. But what we have here is the bin directory and our lib directory. So the bin directory is where we're going to define, instantiate our CDK application, and essentially deploy our CDK stack. Now, look at this as like the entry point to your CDK application. So you can see here, we instantiate our CDK app, and then we actually call this stack here that we've defined in the lib directory, which we'll look at in just a moment. And here's where you can pass some different parameters into your stack when you create it. Again, you want to make more programmatic decisions. This is the nice thing, is we're using a programming language, so we can pass some input properties to our stack and then make decisions based on those properties. So one thing to note here when you get started is the defaults are that we're not going to actually pass in an environment object here, but that environment object is where you're going to define your account number and your region. So what will happen is the CDK is just going to use these default environment variables, and it'll also, the region will be implied and the account will be implied from the credential chain. So the AWS CLI, AWS SDKs, they follow the credential chain, which I'll get you more details on that. I'll share a link here, but look at the credential chain as when you instantiate an API call to AWS using the CLI or the SDKs, they'll start by looking at your AWS config file or your AWS credentials file locally on your file system. If that doesn't exist, it looks at the environment variables, AWS default region, AWS secret access key, and so on. So it just follows that chain. And so that's what gets followed here when you don't apply your environment specifically. So we will not do that. And I'm just going to delete this because I like it clean. Okay. Now, again, you see here, this is our CDK stack, and your CDK stack code and your construct code, this is where you're going to do most of the work, where you're going to define your cloud resources. So you can see here, that's stored under lib. So again, we have a skeleton project here. It's very straightforward, very basic right now, but it gives us something to build on. And you can see we have it commented out right now. I'm not going to actually uncomment anything yet because we want to see what the CDK will deploy for us. But again, this is where you start to create your infrastructure as code, define the resources you want to build and deploy, and that's going to basically be transpiled into a CloudFormation stack once you generate your once you run your CDK synth and diff and deploy, which we'll walk through in just a minute. So again, this is all defined here in the workshop. Again, this is your application's entry point, and this is your main stack. So what's given to you is just an example, but it looks like we can actually we'll run a deploy. We'll deploy some of this stuff and have some fun here. So I'm not going to deploy exactly what's here. Actually, maybe I will, but I don't want to copy paste. So the first thing we wanted to do was let's just deploy a queue. Okay. So we'll comment this out. Now you'll see here, SQS is not imported. So we are importing the CDK library, but a cleaner way to import resource-specific libraries from the CDK lib is to follow things this way. So, I just type import all as SQS from the AWS CDK lib /SQS. Okay. So the first thing we'll do is just define a simple queue. And again, working in the IDE, the really nice thing is I have all of the input properties. I can read them here. They're available. I get the description. This is that type sense, the IntelliSense with the typing. It's very nice to see all the resources that I can create, all the modifications I can make to those resources when creating them. So, if we wanted to name, and just a tip, if you can avoid naming resources when creating them, that's always a good idea, because CloudFormation, if a resource is named, it can't automatically replace it. There's always a little drama there. So avoid naming resources if you can. But actually, I'll just leave that. So the next thing, I'm going to go back here, is we wanted to create an SNS topic, and then we're going to subscribe our SQS queue to that topic. So let's go up here, and now we're going to import all. And actually, you know what? We could even be a little more explicit here. from AWS CDK lib, AWS SNS. By the way, if you are not using AI, code helpers like Code Whisperer, I highly recommend it. It just makes life a whole lot easier when you're developing. It has literally changed my life. I cannot see anything, in the previous world. Just using these AI code assistants has made my life just 10 times better. So highly recommend it. Check out Code Whisperer. It's and Q, just super helpful, makes life way, way easier. Good suggestions. It's not always 100% right, but it's a good way to get started. And it oftentimes it'll make suggestions based off of what you've written previously in your code, and it just makes your life much easier. So highly recommend it. Check it out. All right, so let's create our SNS topic now. So we're going to create a topic, and we'll say new topic, and then we want to just pass in this, and we'll just call it, CDK workshop topic. And again, if there were any input properties we wanted to add here, I could change the name. If I wanted to add, make it FIFO, all of these various things. So again, maybe I'll just name it this. What the heck, why not? Okay, so we've created our topic. Now, what we want to do is connect our topic to our queue. So let's go back here, and what we're going to do is add a subscription to our topic, and that subscription will be that SQS queue. So let's go do this. And actually, you can see here, there's another library, SNS subscriptions. So we'll do that. Import all as SNS sub. I'm too lazy to do all that, so we'll do that. And now we're going to create a subscription here. So topic, add subscription, and then we're going to subscribe to this queue. So this is where the real power of the CDK lies, is these abstractions. Now, because when you think about all of these things I'm creating, generally when I want to connect the topic to that SQS queue, there's quite a few lines of code I have to write. I have to think about how to connect them, IAM, all the various resources required to make sure that they work together. But in this case, with the CDK, I'm creating a queue, I'm creating a topic, and now as one of these helper methods on this topic, I can just add a subscription and then pass in this subscription object to that queue, and then it's going to stitch everything together on the back end for me. So again, what you can see here is we're very simply creating an SNS queue, an SNS topic, and subscribing that queue to receive messages from that topic. Okay, so now the next step, the next logical step here in our workflow is we're going to want to, we want to see what happens when we run this code. We want to actually synthesize our CDK code into that Cloud Assembly code. And that Cloud Assembly is simply CloudFormation. So I didn't mention this earlier, but it's good to mention if you're not aware. The CDK, when it synthesizes all of your TypeScript or whatever language you're writing in, it's actually synthesizing that into CloudFormation. And then it deploys that CloudFormation for you. So the benefit here is you're getting all of the advantages of having a managed infrastructure as code engine, which is taking care of the state management. So all of the resources that I create and deploy through infrastructure as code, it tracks those resources. When we deploy a change, it will track the change and update those resources. When I remove things, it'll remove, and so on. So just foundationally, this is one of the biggest benefits of infrastructure as code, is that state management engine. So now what we're going to do is run a CDK synth. And now I'm going to move this up here because, again, I'm super zoomed We're going to run a CDK synth. And now what's going to happen is the CDK CLI is going to take all of my CDK code that I wrote in TypeScript, and it's going to compile it into that CloudFormation code. And you can see as the output, this is all of the CloudFormation code that it created. So you can see the SNS subscription it took care of, the SQS queue policy, and then creating that queue. So this is a really important thing to point out here. Remember, I mentioned stitching everything together. This created a queue policy that allows SNS and SQS to work together. I didn't have to create that policy or define that anywhere. You can see in my CDK code, I just have these three things that I create, and then the CDK higher level abstractions work behind the scenes to connect those resources together. So, and again, this is like, how many lines of code is this? Math is hard. What is that? 11 through 19. So is that like 8 lines of code? But if I were to run this CDK synth, now granted, the CDK synth, the CloudFormation it outputs does have some additional metadata and some things that the CDK looks at. But if I were to do a word count here on the CloudFormation output, 155 lines. So 8 lines to 155. Say a lot of that is metadata. Even 8 lines compared to 80 lines, it's a pretty big difference. So, okay, so we've synthesized, and now we see that the CDK can take my infrastructure as code definition, and it's able to convert that to the CloudFormation. So it's able to create CloudFormation, and it shows that my code so far looks good. So again, the CDK here, and again, you see these are just some conditionals, the CDK metadata. That's why I said a lot of it, doesn't necessarily count. Okay. So the next step is we'll want to deploy. Now, prior to deploying any CDK code to your account or to your region, you're going to need to bootstrap your region. And essentially we're going to run the CDK bootstrap command. And what the CDK bootstrap command is going to do is it creates an S3 bucket. If you go with the defaults, by the way, so I'm going to say that there are ways you can override some of the things I'm going to mention. But when you run a CDK bootstrap, just a generic bootstrap, it's going to create an S3 bucket with all the IAM assets that when CloudFormation deploys, it'll assume those IAM roles. It's going to create an ECR repository for any Docker container images that you build as a part of the CDK. Yes, we haven't even talked about that, but the CDK has this really cool construct called the assets library. It's the assets library where essentially the CDK will build, and for a Lambda function, it will build your code, compress into a zip file, push it to S3, automatically sync it with your Lambda function. And same with ECS, it can build your container image, and Lambda, by the way, can build your container image, push that image, automatically sync it to your task definition and your ECS service that you deploy. So a lot of these really cool things that normally, these things that you would normally do on your own, it's really cool because the CDK can handle that. And I like to talk a lot about bundling your application logic with your infrastructure as code logic, and the CDK simplifies that through the assets library. So definitely something to check out. Again, cdklive.com, we have a video on that where we talk about assets, walk through the various types of assets you can deploy, and so on. Okay, so now we're going to go back and we're going to bootstrap our environment. Now, the first thing I want to do, and grep is default region. Export AWS default region equals US East 1. We're going to do US East 1. Okay, so let's move this up here, and then we're going to run a CDK bootstrap. Now, again, it's going to derive the information about how it's bootstrapping. You can see it grab my account number, my region. those were from that credential chain. So I didn't export anything. I didn't actually pass this in. When you bootstrap, you can also pass this in, write this on your own, and pass that in if you want to be explicit with what you're bootstrapping. But it figured that out on its own. And now it's creating those IAM roles. It's creating that S3 bucket to store those roles and those various assets that the CDK relies on when it deploys resources to your region, to your account. So this just takes a minute. You can see it's not a lot, but now as it deploys, there are ways that you can override some of these inputs. So for example, if your company says, I don't want to use the default role that the CDK creates, I want it to be a role that we control and own and manage. You can pass that role and as a part of your bootstrap process. So there's a lot of functionality that you can do to configure how you deploy those assets and what assets you use, when deploying your resources with the CDK. The other common thing is around container images. So when you bootstrap and when you deploy container images through the CDK, it deploys them to a single repository in ECR. Because the idea here is when you're building and coupling your application code with your infrastructure code, the idea of needing to have a separate build process for your container images kind of goes away. But in some use cases, or there's still many reasons why that may not work for some users, some customers. So instead, you can actually override the default synthesizer, and you can say, I want to have a specific repo for my particular CDK application that I'm deploying here. So you can have some of that separation and so on. Okay, so we've bootstrapped our account. Now I'm going to guess the next step is it says to deploy. What I would do first is I want to run a CDK diff because I want to know what we're going to deploy, and if anything's going to change, I want to know that prior to deploying. So we're going to run that CDK diff. Let's put this all the way up here. And you can see what that diff returns is, here are the resources you're creating. It also will tell you at the top if there's any IAM related changes. So two things that are really important from a security perspective when you're deploying, in AWS. I mean, there's a million things, but two things that are really important when you're working with infrastructure as code, and especially when you're dealing with abstractions in your infrastructure as code. Number one is identity and access management. I want to know what IAM resources or policies or roles are changing, and what are they allowing? What actions are they allowing? What principle is going to assume that that particular role, and then what are they, talking to? So you can see here it's creating that SQSQ policy that's allowing for the SNS service to talk to that queue. So if there were any security group changes, that would also show up here as well. So, and again, I can see here's all the resources I'm creating. Some other changes, oftentimes, like this is just metadata. So CDK metadata is just important for the CDK CLI. When CDK deploys, this is for it to have a good understanding of the environment, when it was deployed, in some of the various states that it was deployed, what version of Bootstrap it used, and so on. Okay, so now it's time to CDK deploy. So when you're really comfortable and you're deploying maybe in a dev environment, you may want to pass this flag, require approval never. What this will do is this won't require you to approve if there's any IAM or any security related changes. But in this case, I want to be prompted before I actually deploy. So now I'm going to run a CDK deploy. And what you'll see here is it starts by building these assets, and then it publishes them. So those assets being CloudFormation templates and so on. And you can see here, before it continues to deploy, it's going to ask me, do you want to deploy these changes? Because it recognized that there is a security change. There is an IAM policy change. So I'm going to say yes. And here's what the CloudFormation is going to do. First, it's going to create a change set. And then from that change set, it's then going to deploy to my AWS region. And again, you can see here, this is the process, or I can see the status of my deployment. Let's switch back and let's actually go here to CloudFormation. And you can see the CDK Workshop stack is deploying. So again, this is simply CloudFormation code that the CDK is generating and then deploying on my behalf. And I'm able to, anything that I want to look at or work with, I can find here in CloudFormation. So if I want to see the state, the change sets that were ran and executed, I'm able to view all that. So again, the CDK is leveraging the power of CloudFormation for all of that infrastructure as code, state management, and so on. So you get that nice visualization from CloudFormation when your resources deploy. So this is really helpful, if things fail. Obviously, it will tell you in the logs here too. But again, you can go straight to CloudFormation if you want. I love this new detect root cause button. If you haven't seen this and you use CloudFormation, it's really neat. So, if you have a really long CloudFormation template, you have a ton of resources, you just hit detect root cause. It's going to take you right to what it suspects is the problem in your deployment. So, okay. So that's our CDK deploy. We could see in the CloudFormation console all of our resources, everything that deployed, and we could actually even drill down into it. So actually, you know what? Why don't we go to our SQS queue? Should we do that? Let's do that. Let's go to SQS, and here's that queue it created. And you can see this is the SNS subscription. So the topic that's subscribed to this queue, and then the access policy allowing SNS to work with this particular queue. So if you're like me and working in IAM is maybe not your favorite thing, the CDK simplifies a lot of that. And again, IAM is important. You want to make sure that you're scoping to least privilege policies. You're not just going ham and leaving everything wide open. The CDK can help you. And another thing is you can always override these too. So there are some builders that use the CDK and they make it very clear they want to create their own policies, their own roles. You can absolutely do that and then pass those policies, pass those roles into those objects when you create them so you can have more control. So that's it for this section of the workshop. Now, if you know me or if you've ever seen me talk, I could sit here and talk for the next 5 hours, but at some point, they got to pull me off stage. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So that's why I broke this down into 4 separate workshops, because you can see it took me about 45 minutes just to get through the intro. So to recap, we installed our dependencies, our prerequisites. So we have the CDK CLI, Node.js, in AWS CLI, we're working in an IDE, and we initialized our CDK project. We walked through the structure of the project, the various files that get created when we run that CDK init. We created some resources. We deployed that queue. We deployed, hey, Gary, hey, good to see you. We deployed that queue. We deployed that SNS topic, and we created that subscription for them to work together and interact with one another. And then we ran a CDK synth. And the synth is that command that's going to synthesize that CDK code into that CloudFormation so we can see what the CloudFormation looks like. And then we ran a CDK diff. That CDK diff is really important because we wanted to see what changed in the environment. And then we ran a CDK deploy. You know what? I'm going to do a bonus. This is what happens. See, I get excited about something pops in my brain, and I'm just ready to just throw everything out and just keep going. I'm going to do one more thing, and then we'll part ways. So I mentioned the CDK diff. Why don't we now add another resource, or let's modify a resource. So I want to change something in my queue. And let's see. Let's do a delivery delay. So we're going to say here, CDK, we're going to use the duration class. And then we're going to say, I want the delivery delay to be 60. I don't know, let's go with some weird number, 23 seconds. Okay, so I just made a minor change. And now if I go back here and I run a CDK diff again, what we should see is what's changed between the two resources. Now, what's happening, and this was in one of our more recent releases, with the CDK to give you a more accurate representation of what's changing, we now run a change set in CloudFormation and wait for the response so we can tell you exactly what CloudFormation is seeing has changed. But if you don't want to wait, you can always pass in the no change set flag, which we could do right now, which you can see there, by the way, it just added this delay seconds, and you have a really nice visualization of what's changing. So you can see when I ran no change set, it worked a little faster, but when it runs the change set, I'm getting a more accurate representation of what's changing. So we can see we added that delay seconds, and now this time I'm going to pass in require approval never, and then we're going to deploy those changes. And we can see if we break something, we can see what we broke and what happened from there. So again, it creates that change set. If we go back here, actually, you can see here, what did we change? Was it the delivery delay? So the delivery delay is 0 seconds, I think. Was it delivery delay? Let's see here. Yeah, delivery delay. And, you know, another thing here, these are L2 constructs. So oftentimes, like you can see this queue construct is an L2. It has more abstractions built in, more defaults built into it. But I could also, just to show you what an L1 construct looks like, queue CFN equals new SQS.CFN queue. And what you see here is now this is all CloudFormation. So everything here is CloudFormation. And you have to look, if you want more information, you click this link and it'll take you to the CloudFormation docs and you can figure out what you need. So just let's look really quickly here so you can see our delivery delay was this. I hope I'm sharing my screen, right? I'm sharing my screen. Yeah. Okay. My screen shared. Okay. That would have been pretty awesome if I was doing this the whole time with no screen share. So that should be good. But if somehow I'm not sharing my screen, please let me know. So if I click more here, you can see now that delivery delay was applied. So that's it. The other thing I will direct you to is the CDK API docs. This API reference is going to be your best friend. If you're not getting enough answers from your IDE or you want to read more about something, head over to here, and then you can go to the overview. I get the README here. I can see it has good tips on various things that you may want to work with to expand this particular construct or work with some of the features of the construct. And it gives you some examples too. So this reference is again your best friend. This paired with your IDE is just a winning combination. So that is it for this session. Now, the next session, what we're going to do is we're actually going to deploy a REST API. We're going to put it behind a Lambda function behind an API gateway, and we're going to deploy our application code. We're actually going to walk through some of the local developer experience too. So we'll use the CDK watch command, which will, as we make changes to our application code, it will just automatically apply that to the Lambda function as we make those changes. And then we'll actually dive into writing a construct. So remember that construct represents that reusable module of code that we want to reuse across resources or just reuse within our own code base. So that is it for today. I want to thank everybody for joining. And if you have any questions or you're looking for more video content, check out CDK Live, just cdklive.com. That's our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. You can also reach out to me on Twitter or X at real Adam J. Keller. Honestly, I don't do a whole lot on there anymore, but if you just want to reach out, say hello, or you want to see a particular topic, please feel free to reach out. But that's it for today. Next week, we're going to dive into what I had mentioned, and that's a wrap for today. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you next week.